Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I believe we had an OSPO event the last time, and I felt it would be very nice for us and our viewers to to look at some software licensing schemes, um, to sort of go through them to understand what they are and to see what or where they can be used. So, my name is John Ajay, and I'll be taking you through this session. So we begin with a license. The first thing with a license, just building up from the ground. A license basically a set of rules that lets us know that we are allowed to do something, but only under some conditions. For example, if we have a driver's license, we can drive. But even before we get the license, there are certain conditions that have to be met. There are some age conditions and there are some other medical conditions we have to pass. Another way we can look at it is like, which is in terms of software use. So another way we can think about it is like borrowing someone's car, and one owner may tell us that we can use it anyhow we want. Once you are done, just bring it back. Another person can also say that we can drive it. However, we are not allowed to repaint or lend it to others. So when someone says, "Oh, use the car just for work," so that particular agreement is what we know as a license. All right. So when it comes to software license, what would a software license be? And I would say that it will simply be a legal agreement defining software usage rights. So it's a legal agreement that is telling you how to use the software in terms of the rights you have on the software. So it would control redistribution, being giving the software out to other people, modification, that would be changing anything about it. And then for commercial use, commercial being buying and selling. So software licensing is critical for developers, startups, and enterprises, as we are going to see. All right. Now, in software, a license controls things like the first thing is, can you copy the software? Most of the software license that we have are centered around these things. Now, first one be whether you can copy the software. The second says, can you modify the code? The third will ask if you can sell it. Will you be able to redistribute it? Are you obliged to show any changes that you have made? And then can companies use it commercially? The last but one, must you review your changes? Is personally something which I went through. I had a crazy idea of wanting to build a browser, and unfortunately didn't know about the Mozilla scheme of things. And then I went and I'm very used to going to GitHub and seeing, I click and then they're like download zip, download, get the git bash, the terminal command, and I'm looking for the thing and I can't find it. I'm like, oh, these guys should just give me their code, and it turns out that there's so many things I had to do, and even when I had to do them after making my changes, I had to give it back. And that was around the time I did not really understand this whole licensing thing. So um, one thing we talk about is this: software is automatically protected by copyright law. So even if you don't have a license, technically nobody is allowed to do much with it beside what the copyright law, which is based on your geographical area, would permit. So even if you wrote a software and you didn't give it any license, there are copyright laws which would legally protect you. So we come to understand that what the license really does is that it lets you define or let me say, give more control over just what the copyright law is giving you, especially to others. Now, the next section will look at why software licenses are different. Why is there a need for us to have many different software licenses? Now, if you know anything about software licenses, or if you have done any research about them, you realize that there's a lot of them. For me personally, the first times I was looking at them, I didn't see the difference because there's this long what I mean, at the time, I'm coming from a Windows background, so it was what I was familiar with was the end user license agreement, and usually I just click accept, but this time it was this long thing, and funny enough, they all began the same way, and I didn't really know why it was even necessary. But one reason why licensing in software is very important is that software itself is by definition unusual. Um, one quote, I don't know if I should call it a quote, by watched a documentary by one South African millionaire. We may have heard of him. His name is Fuzi, and he was talking about how he doesn't really push himself into software because in software the production cost is literally zero. When you okay, maybe I shouldn't say production cost, but the cost to reproduce, which is the reproduction cost, the reproduction cost. So it's as easy as Control C and Control V. Whereas in the normal economics, we know you pay this for this much. If you are buying 10,000 things, then you have to multiply by this and that. But software is very unusual, and one of the reasons is this. Number one, it can be copied infinitely. So there's no limit to the amount of times you can copy. I don't know if anyone has been hit with you can no longer copy because you've hit the maximum amount of copies your machine allows. The other thing is that software can be modified easily. So anyone with a text editor, especially with source code, can just change some stuff in it. Some text-based games, you could just go in, make a few modifications, and then just like that, the software is different. Then the other thing is that it can be combined with other software. So we can take one software and then we can take another software and then we can merge them together. And then we can distribute it globally in seconds. So you could just push it onto the internet and anyone on any part of the earth can reach it. And because of this, software licenses are very detailed compared to other normal products. An example is a music license might tell us, don't redistribute this song. However, a software license might say you may modify the source code, but if you distribute your modified version, you must also publish the source under the same license. So some software licenses force you to use the license of the original product. Once you make any modification, you have to use the same license. But there are others that don't do so, as we will see. So let's look at the main types of software licensing. The first type is the proprietary license, and the proprietary meaning that it belongs to someone and then he retains the rights to have full control of the software. This is usually used by companies like Microsoft and Adobe. Usually, you will not be able to see the source code and you cannot modify it and you cannot redistribute it. If you are going to modify it, it would mean that you have to patch the binary itself. But for the source code itself, you will not be giving access to it. Examples of such software is the Microsoft Windows operating system itself uses a proprietary license. Adobe Photoshop which many of us graphic designers will know, also use the proprietary license. The easiest way to understand this is the you bought the game and not the recipe, which is more like you bought the food but you didn't buy the recipe. So here's your food, take it and eat it. But I'm not going to give you the recipe to make more for yourself. Then the other type would be open source licenses. So, like I said, in a proprietary license, the person retains the right totally to himself. However, when we are working with open source, one of the defining features of open source is that the source code is made public so that anyone can look at it by themselves. So open source licenses allow access to source code, but then different licenses allow different freedoms. So even though the source code is made public to everyone, what happens is that many people disagree with how you should be able to fit the code. And that is why we have so many different branches of software licenses. So let's look at some of the freedoms that are covered in software licenses. So I have this chart here, and if we look at the columns, the first talks about free software. When we look at definition, free is a matter of liberty, not price. So when we say software is free, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to pay anything for the software. It just means that the software is giving freely, or like liberty. That's the whole point of the liberty over there. When you look at the ground philosophy, free software is a social movement for freedoms. It's not necessarily free of charge, and it is covered by copyright law. So free software is one, and then there is also open source software. So open source software, now open means that it doesn't just mean that you have access to the source code. There's some other meanings which we'll look to it. Freeware refers now in freeware. So that's the difference between free software and freeware. In freeware, free here refers to the price which the software is given to you for free. However, the freedom of use is going to be either opened up or restricted by the creator. And then we have public domain software, which says, or which belongs to the public as a whole. All right. So then the next thing we talk about is copyright, copyleft, permissive, and then Creative Commons. So what is copyright? And how can we define copyright based on what a user is allowed to do with the code? So when you have software with copyrights, usually the freedoms you are giving is what the creator dictates. So the creator of that software with the copyright is able to tell you what and what not you can do with the software. With a copyleft license, the user, you are able to do what you want, which is what you who has gotten the software wants to do. However, there are some certain rules that you have to meet. With a permissive license, the user is able to do what he wants with a few restrictions. And with Creative Commons, the user is able to do whatever he wants without restrictions. Now, this is when we explain them in terms of what you are allowed to do with the code. The clause of the use for a copyright license would be as the creator dictates. With a copyleft license, any derivative work, meaning that any work you make from the original, it has to be, or it should be attributed to the creator. It should be open source, and it should also be copyleft. We'll talk about a very popular one. With a permissive license, the derivative work must be attributed to a creator. And the same thing with Creative Commons. So any new work you do, you just let us know that, oh, by the way, I got it from here. The source code for copyright is as a creator dictates. If he wants to give it to you, he'll give it to you. With copyleft, the source code must be open. With a permissive license, you don't have to make the source code open. And then with Creative Commons, there is no specific terms about distribution of source code. So we can also see as the creator will dictate. Now, one other thing with software is bugs. When we give software to people to use, it's very liable that there may be some bugs in it. We are going to look at how these four types of licenses talk or speak about how or whether the creator can be liable for bugs. The first is the copyright. With copyright, the creator is liable for bugs. With copyleft, the creator is also liable for bugs. With a permissive license, the creator is not liable. They don't have to, or you cannot take any legal action against them for having bugs in the source code. And that is also the case with Creative Commons. Now, the next thing is relicensing. Now, relicensing is what happens when you have taken an original work and then you have made a derivative of it, and then you're also planning to push it out to the world. So when you relicense a copyright work, it's going to be the new license is going to be what the creator wants. So the creator of the original software is going to be the one dictating what you can do with the derivative. With a copyleft license, the derivative work cannot be released as proprietary software. This is one of the main differences between copyright and copyleft. You cannot make proprietary software from or using a copyleft license, or you cannot make a derivative from something which is copyleft. With a permissive license, the derivative work can be released under another license or as proprietary software. So a permissive license would, based on the type of permissive license you're using, give you the permission to use another license. Then with Creative Commons, the derivative work can be released under another license. So almost the same thing as what we have in permissive. Now, let's look at the commercial restrictions. Commercial meaning that will we be able to use it as a service, buying and selling of that particular software. With copyright, whether you can buy and sell the software or let me say resell it has to do with what the original creator dictates. With the copyleft, it is permitted. With permissive, permitted, and then with creative. So over here, copyright is the only one that really stands out as needing what the creator dictates. Now, I'll move on to the other one. Now, this is just permissive versus copyleft. These, when it comes to working with software, precisely code, most of the time, what we use, especially in the open source community, would fall under these two categories. So whether it is copyleft or it is permissive. Permissive licenses allow broad use. So a permissive license will allow more freedom, whereas a copyleft license will require derivative openness, which means that when you use the copyleft license, as soon as you make a derivative, like my Mozilla story, you have to contribute back to the community. Now, even with copyleft, there are weak copyleft and strong copyleft licenses, and this affects linking behavior. So I'll talk about linking behavior. Our next section is about open source licenses. These are very common open source licenses. If we look at the chart up there, you can see that the very first one is the Apache license. Then we have the BSD, the MIT, the GPL, LGPL, and the AGPL. I have to be honest, the AGPL is very new to me. The rest of them I am very familiar with. All right, so when we look at the first three, being Apache, BSD, and MIT, what we realize is that they are all permissive. And like we said, permissive means they allow greater freedom. Whereas all of the GPL derivatives, as you can see, like we said, anything that comes from copyleft will also be copyleft. So those three are all copyleft licenses. Now, the second rule asks if copyright protection is whether you have copyright protection. And with copyleft, with the copyleft licenses, of course. But then the reason why the the permissive licenses, because of the fact that they give you the freedom, it doesn't mean that they are different from the copyleft licenses. But basically, in that same sense, the freedom they give you is the freedom for you to choose whether you want to be closely aligned with a copyleft license or not. So this is the freedom we talk about. Copyleft forces you, it forces the restrictions on you. However, you can still implement those same restrictions if you were using the permissive licenses. Now, can we use them in commercial applications? We have true for all of them. Do we need patent licenses, so on and so forth? Now we have some very popular open source projects that use this, and some of these for Apache, Kubernetes, Swift, Firebase. For BSD, we have Django and the rest. Okay, now I would like to speak about them. I'd like to speak about them one by one so that we can see how they differ from each other. The first is Apache 2.0. Apache 2.0 is the most modern and the most balanced among the permissive licenses. It is written clearly regarding the modern copyright user rules, in particular patent relationship. Apache licensed software can be used in your commercial project for free, and the only restriction is trademark use. So you have the freedom to use it in your project. However, the main difference between Apache and the other permissive licenses is this. The first thing is, don't name your project like it's an endorsement from Apache. So I would say this is closely related to the BSD license. When you create your new project that borrows anything from Apache, do not name the project as if Apache is backing you. Then the second thing is, don't use the famous feather logo anywhere in your project or documentation. By the way, that's the feather logo up there, the first one. So don't use the name, don't use the feather. It's all yours. However, don't mention that Apache had anything to do with it. Some examples of the software that use the Apache license is Kubernetes. We have Swift and Firebase. I, for example, would shift more to Firebase. I don't know if you've used it. Firebase. Yeah. Yes. So for me, Firebase is the most common in my sense. Then let's look at the next one. BSD, the Berkeley Software Distribution. So BSD is a permissive license, and initially it consisted of 4 chapters. Later, the chapter, which is the fourth chapter, that demanded to include the copyright notice in all advertising materials, was excluded. BSD is often mentioned interchangeably with MIT because they are very similar and they accomplish largely identical goals. BSD allows releasing proprietary software, and incorporating this software into proprietary products as long as the original copyright and license requirements is fulfilled. So the BSc license says that if you are going to fulfill if you are going to fulfill the original copyright, which is where you are getting the original work, and then the license requirements, if you can fulfill it, then sure, you can use the software in your own derivative. Very popular examples of software that use the BSD license is Django and React and Flutter. Uh, okay, these ones I'm very familiar with them all. Django being for Django is a web CMS, right? For Python, yes. And React very famous for coding JavaScript. Um, Flutter is from Google, using is a framework from Google that uses that as the main programming language. Then the MIT license. The MIT license. Personally, my favorite type of license. This license is permissive without copyleft and is very similar to BSD. It permits reuse within proprietary software with including a copy of the MIT license terms and copyright notice. Uh, the more size is the small size, not the type. The small size is the advantage of the license. The disadvantage is that there is an inability to regulate patent relationships. So what it would mean is that if two or three people use MIT to create the same thing, you can have the thing looking very similar because of the fact that MIT, in my opinion, is the most free of all of the permissive licenses. So because anyone can just use it, you might have some problems trying to regulate patents because this guy says I got there first, this other guy says I got there first. Examples of software that use the MIT license is AngularJS, jQuery, Netcore, Laravel. Very sure we are familiar with these guys. Yep. Okay. Then the almighty GPL, the General Public License by GNU. The General Public License is the most known amongst open source licenses, and not because it is the easiest to understand, but mostly due to multiple mentions and references. As they call it as they call it an open license, many would think that the code under GPL can be used in any possible way, and programs made with it are entirely free of charge. However, these statements are not valid. So my experience with GPL comes from I was trying to build an online how do you call it, a chess, if you could say, dojo. Unfortunately, the strongest chess engine in the world, called Stockfish, is licensed under GPL, and I, who is very familiar with MIT, sought to go. I just take Stockfish and I put it in my application, and then I read the license and I came to understand that nope, based on what I am trying to achieve, GPL is not a license for me, and hence I cannot use Stockfish in the application I'm trying to make. I may use another engine. I may develop another engine from scratch. I could find an MIT or BSD engine, which is more free for me to use. However, if I use a GPL licensed code, then it means that anything I do with that code and any project I put it in, that project also has to be open source because it has to adopt the GPL license as well. Now continue. GPL is a copyleft license, meaning that any derivative work must be open source, and so that's what I just explained. So if you are using GPL in your, and I think this is very important, what we are learning today, because if you are coming from, I go to GitHub, I clone some repository, I take it, I put the code in here, I use it, I clone this, I put it here, I use it without understanding the licenses. You could be hit by legal action. Like, I almost fell into the trap because, of course, I want my thing to be very strong. I want to use the best out there. However, since it's released under GPL and it doesn't go in line with what I want, I cannot use it. Because as soon as I use it, I have to make everything also under GPL, which is what I don't want to do. I did find out that there were some workarounds, which is that if the software is different, which is the binary form of the software is different from what you already have, then because it is not sourced, because it's already a binary, so because it is not sourced, which is in terms of code, you don't have to keep your thing under GPL. So I'll try and give a much better this thing. So chess applications and other stuff that use very strong things, like I was saying with Stockfish. One of the things they do is that the application itself is compiled as an executable on one end, and then the engine is compiled separately. Now, because there is no mix of source code, they are two different products. The engine which was compiled, because of the fact that it uses GPL, can be given out freely. You don't have to pay anything. You can give it out because it's compiled. So I can take that and then just bundle it with my application, and I can give it out. But the fact is that these are two very distinct. There is Stockfish and my engine, which is two very different things. They are not together. One of them stands alone. This guy doesn't source from this other person. In my case, what was very bad was the fact that I was on web. So I'm working with JavaScript, which means I'm not compiling anything. I'm directly putting script tags, or I'm calling workers and stuff. And because of that way, it means that the source code is going to come into my application by all means. And so I will have to make it open source, not just open source, but also it also has to use a copyleft license, just like GPL. All right, so as we've already mentioned, this is the significant distinction to permissive license like BSD and then MIT, which are the widely used, less restrictive examples. Now, there's the GPL version 2, version 3. GPL has gone through some revisions over the years. Some example of the software that use GPL is Joomla, Notepad++, which I have used before. I've used all these guys before. And then MySQL, which is very popular back end. I don't know if it's popular anymore. It's still popular, yeah. I mean, I still use it. In fact, it's the only database I use. But yes, so GPL, and so that would mean that MariaDB, which is sourced from MySQL, would also be GPL because it's coming directly from it, and GPL enforces that. Okay, so then there is another one which is lesser GPL, LGPL. Now LGPL is a copyleft license, very similar to GPL, from which it is derived, but with a weaker copyleft requirement. So one of the things is that it allows software being applied in a proprietary project under certain circumstances. It allows software being applied in proprietary projects. Okay, so you can use it as part of the project code without having to, under certain circumstances, without having to make the whole application GPL. That's the main or the significant difference between GPL and LGPL. Now, LGPL is usually considered a compromise between the strong copyleft licenses like GPL and permissive licenses like BSD or MIT. So LGPL is in a way trying to keep the normal GPL, but then trying to open just a little more freedom, which we usually enjoy when you are using BSD or MIT. So examples of the software covered is Qt, pronounced cute, and Sharp Develop. And even over here, I have a story uh, from my browser exploits. I decided that okay, maybe I cannot build a browser. I'll just look for some modern day UI framework. And looking through all of them, I found Qt to be one of the most modern, very nice and stuff. And then once I also I started looking in Qt, I got hit with this same GPL thing again. So I mean, we can see that GPL in its sense, or it's something which is there. We cannot run away from it, and it's very important that we know these licenses so that we don't make mistakes about using them. I think maybe we would have heard of stories of people being hit with lawsuits uh, for the tech, YouTube, or TikTok side. We hear news of it all the time. We hear who some large big tech company threatened legal action to some people because they saw some code from somewhere. I want to talk about the next one, Affero GPL. This one, to be very honest, this is my first time meeting it. But let's see what's talk about. Affero GPL version 3 is also a copyleft license. The terms are almost identical to GPL with the additional paragraph, which allows users interacting with the licensed program online to get the source code of the program. This is usually not it is not recommended to apply new AGPL for any commercial projects performing online. So, I mean, if your project is commercial, one of the things that AGPL gives you is that anyone who is interacting with a licensed program can get the source code of the program. So, if you want to hide your source code, if you don't want anyone to use your source code, then this is something you should look at. All right, now I want to talk of license compatibility, and this is the last section of the things I'll talk over here. Now, because we are an open source community, and one of the good things about using open source is that you don't have to start from scratch. So, more examples. Just yesterday evening, I was looking at a license where I wanted the bitmap manipulation license, and then I was able to get one. The good news was that it was public domain. So I don't think we talked about public domain because we're looking more on the open source side. But yeah. So what is license compatibility? When you are sourcing a project from many different places, when you're using different source code from this side, this side, this side, I want to mix this and this and this and that and so on and so forth. One of the problems you can have is that the license wouldn't be compatible. You can have one project with a license coming into another project or coming together with another project whose license will not allow it. I think one example is the Apache license. If I'll just look at the Apache license, yes. So, okay, the only restriction is trademark. Yes, so patent relationships. Good. So one of the other things about Apache, the Apache license is so like it's a patent relationship, which is attribution. So I got this when you are done using the license. Well, one thing you should do is you should be able to say that, oh, I got this license from this person. This is where I got the license from. In fact, there's an example from a BSD, which is I think the BSD 3 clause license says that if you use this code, please don't go around saying that the person you took the code from is the one behind you, the one who is backing you to sort of continue with your project. So an example is if I were to take something from BSD source repository. Let's say, for example, um, let's say Ubuntu Canonical has a BSD code base, BSD license code base, and we are using a 3-clause BSD. The 3-clause BSD says that when you are free to use our software, but please don't go around and tell people that the derivative you have made, Canonical is backing you. So no with that. There's another one also, which is a variation of the MIT license, which is the zlib license. The zlib license says you are free to use the code, but please attribute as anytime or anywhere you use it. Even when you make a derivative out of it, let people know that this is coming from. So I think the main ones are, is it libpng and libjpeg. If you make any changes to them, it's fine. But let people know that the original source code was from libpng and libjpeg. So these are some of the things. License compatibility. When you have many different source codes you are bringing together under one project, you have to be very sure that the license is compatible. If you are integrating something into an open source project, which is very permissive, you should not use something from GPL, because you should know that once you apply it to that code base, you're basically saying that everything else on that code base should also be using GPL. So this is one of the things that we have to keep in our minds. Now, here are some resources I took when I was bringing these things up. The information. So this another example of licensing in active use. So attribution. So I tell you that some of the things I use are from, number one is Wikipedia. So I got some info when doing my research. I got some info from Wikipedia, and then there's this other link from Medium, which is understanding open source and free software licensing. In fact, I think I use 2 images over here, which come from that link. And then I have some other ones which are just all around, source from images, Google Images. That's where I get them from. So what I do right now, like I said, is an example of attribution to let people know where the thing came from. I think attribution is also another part of the Creative Commons license. And thank you very much. If there are any questions, we'll hear if anyone has any questions. Yes, Mr. Gans.
Yeah, so I noticed that